My name is Jill Dunlap, and I am the Senior Director for Research Policy and Civic Engagement at NASPA, which is one of the two partners along with the Campus Vote Project that runs the Voter-Friendly Campus Initiative. We are really excited for those of you who were able to join us today. We are recording today's session so that those who aren't able to join us due to all of the end of the year festivities that are happening on many campuses, they can view the recording of this later. It'll be posted on our website. So we're really excited to have our colleagues here today. I will turn it over to them. We have with us today Lauren Bartschi, who is the Associate Director of the Carnegie Elective Classifications, and her colleague Marisol Morales, who's the Executive Director of the Carnegie Elective Classifications. So I will turn it over to them and come back at the end when they are done to help navigate any questions that you all have. If you have questions, feel free to go ahead and throw them in the chat. We will answer them at the end of their slide presentation, and you can message them to me directly, or you can put them in the chat for everyone to see. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Lauren and Marisol.
Thanks so much, Jill. So today we're going to talk a little bit about preparing for the 2024 Carnegie Elective Classification for Community Engagement, and we'll dive into what that means and those connections to the Voter-Friendly Campus Project.
So we already did our introductions a little bit earlier, but I'm Marisol and very happy to be with you all today and with my Associate Director, Lauren Bartschi. We're going to get into it. So this is what we hope to cover with you all during this hour that we have together. We're going to do an overview of the 2024 classification timeline framework, strategies that have been effective for successful applicants, and we'll share a lot of resources with you. We've done a comparison around the Voter-Friendly Campus Guide, and so pulling out some of those highlights. And finally, we'll end with a good amount of time for questions and answers as we're together. At this time, we're going to launch a poll so we can know who's in the room joining us today. So as you see that come up on your screen, as we go ahead and launch that, please answer where you're coming from, what kind of institution, as well as what type of classification you may be applying for in this 2024 cycle. Thank you. Wait a couple more seconds, folks. Wonderful. Great. All right, so what we see is that mainly we've got folks joining us from four-year public institutions, and I think the majority will be first time with a handful of reclass. So we'll go over sections of both. They're very similar, but there are some differences between this first time and the reclass. And we'll get our screen shared and then. So as you may have heard, as of April 1st, the Carnegie classifications have a new host, and that is the American Council on Education. So now we are joining you from being housed with the American Council on Education. And this is the first time the classifications, both the universal and basic and the elective classifications, will be housed under one roof. So we're excited about the ongoing developments that will happen between the connections with the different classifications. But for today's purpose, we're going to focus on our community engagement elective, and you'll see some more developments in the months and years to come. So one of the new developments is that we actually finally have another elective classification. This year, we launched for the first time the Leadership for Public Purpose, which is another Carnegie elective classification. So institutions can both apply for the community engagement elective, which has been around for 17 years, as well as now the Leadership for Public Purpose. And in the future, we'll be developing additional electives for institutions to sort of claim their institutional identity with. So we're going to move into the documentation framework, and I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Great, thanks, Marisol. So I'm going to first show you the two timelines of the upcoming classifications. So we named the classification years based off of when they are announced publicly. So we just launched the 2024 cycle in January. It's currently open as we speak. If your campus is interested in applying this cycle, you must initiate an application by October 31st of this year. That is because we are starting a new peer review process. So we need to determine how many campuses will apply so we can select the appropriate number of reviewers. But don't fret, the application is not due until May 1st, 2023. Then we'll start reviews and have the announcement in January 2024. If you're still working or waiting for the next classification cycle, 2026 launches in January of 2024, following a similar timeline due in April 2025 with an announcement in January 2026. A few of you are already for reclassification, it looks like. So when campuses should be reclassifying has changed a little bit in recent years, where we formerly had a 10-year classification cycle. Now you were classified for 6 years. That means for campuses that applied or were classified in 2015, your original reclassification was set to be in 2025. That means that you can now pick between this cycle, 2024, or the next cycle in 2026. It's up to you, and there's maybe no pros and cons on our end for which you select. It's up to your campus and what you're ready for in terms of data and capacity. Campuses that have reclassified in 2006, 8, or 10 but have not reclassified will need to reapply using a first-time classification framework. And if you were last classified in 2020, you can hold off until 2026 unless you're really eager to do it now. So a bit into the application itself. I'm not going to dive into all of these sections, but I wanted to give you all an overview of the types of questions that we ask, especially those of you who are new to the process. There are 14 sections of the application in this cycle, ranging from things like community and campus context to partnerships information, assessment processes, and how community engagement looks like in curricular and co-curricular programming. We also have some space for campuses to think about and reflect on their process and let us know how it all took place on their campuses. What that means is that the classification acts like a benchmarking tool. It's descriptive and self-reportive data and information, so it's narrative driven. There's actually only one question that dives into numbers. So it's the process of very similar to the campus voter-friendly project that's all narrative driven. Institutions evaluate various aspects of their processes in relation to standards of best practice and kind of write a narrative out to the response to different questions. It's a tool that does not create a hierarchy or levels of classification, like the basic classification you may be familiar with. You're put into classification tiers. You either get it or you don't, and it's all in one kind of level. But the most important thing is it's a space for you to tell your campus's story in your unique approach to community engagement. It's a holistic review process, so there's no kind of one-size-fits-all approach. And this application is meant to give you a space to be telling what that looks like.
And just to piggyback on something Lauren had said, if you do not receive the classification, that is not made public. Again, only the institutions that received the classification are announced. So the foundation of the elective classification is really the definition of community engagement that the Carnegie Foundation has. So we like to highlight this because there's two parts to it, and they're really based around the qualities of reciprocity, mutual respect, shared authority, and co-creation. And so we ask campuses to what their definition of community engagement is, if they have one that is different from the Carnegie definition, but also understanding that this is the basis that we use to evaluate the applications that come in. So again, I said it's two parts. The first part is around the process of engagement. So as you see with this definition, it describes the collaboration between institutions of higher ed and their larger communities for mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge, resources in a context of partnership and reciprocity. And so you'll also see in the ordering of the application, partnership and reciprocity towards the beginning. Next slide. The second piece of the definition is around the purpose of engagement. And so why is the university doing this, right? How do you describe that? How you talk about the whys? And so for this piece of the definition, The purpose is the partnership of the college and university knowledge and resources with those of the public and private sectors to enrich scholarship, research, creative activity, enhance curriculum, teaching, learning, prepare educated, engaged citizens, strengthen democratic and civic responsibility, address critical societal issues, and contribute to the public good. So this is the why you engage, right? And so thinking about the programs, academic and co-curricular, and how those are connected to reciprocity and partnership with the community. So really having your teams delve into the definition, thinking about what that looks like juxtaposed to maybe the institutional definition you have will be a good starting point as you put together your application. This application will look very different from previous applications, primarily because of sort of global situations, right? So we do have a section in this 2024 application dedicated for institutions to tell their stories connected to community engagement in COVID-19. So we understand both the challenges that institutions face during COVID, as well as the way that those challenges of COVID impacted the communities that institutions partner with. So there are two things. We have a section where we ask you to tell us that story, but also you can choose the years in which you want to share the data. So you can share data from prior to COVID, so the 2018, 2019, 2019, 2020, or during COVID, or we're not totally out of COVID, but you get to choose which data year you want to. We just ask that in the description, in the narrative, you identify which year you are pulling data from so that the reviewers can understand that in the context of doing the review. For folks who are interested in doing the 2026 application, the data year will be 2022, 2023. But again, institutions have the choice of which data year they want to use for the application. The next piece is continued with the sort of global developments that we see happening, and in particular around racial justice, democracy, and global warming. And so there is a section of this application that also asks institutions to describe how community engagement efforts have been impacted by national events as listed above. And so this gives you also the chance to talk about the work that maybe your institution is doing at the crossroads between DEI and community engagement, climate change, and the work that institutions did, particularly around COVID-19. And so again, this is a narrative-based application. So these spaces give you and your institution an opportunity to tell those stories and how those may have impacted the way that engagement looked like on your campus, how it was done, and also share with the ways that your institutions were responsive to local communities.
So we're going to dive a little bit into strategies for approaching the framework now.
Great. So what's your why? Why is your institution interested in the community engagement elective? Over the years, again, we've been doing this for 17 years. Some of the reasons that we've heard from institutions in terms of their motivation has been around institutional identity, that community engagement is a very important part of their institutional identity, and this is the way that they want to declare and claim that institutional identity connected to engagement. Next is as a process for self-assessment and self-study. So, you know, this application allows institutions to bring disparate parts of the institution together to advance a unified agenda and identify promising practices across the institution. So thinking about the ways that this can be a tool for enhancing and highlighting the kind of engagement work that is taking place across campus and bringing folks together. This can be linked to institutional strategic plans, campus compact civic action plans, or even accreditation processes. So thinking about how do you leverage the classification to also support other areas of self-assessment and self-study. Another piece, and particularly for those who are looking for reclassification, is around accountability. So, you know, this application can help demonstrate that the institution is fulfilling its mission. You can do comparisons between the last time your institution applied and this, and what has been the progression and innovation that has taken place in regards to community engagement. And then thinking about the new levels of legitimacy, public recognition, and visibility of the important work that's happening between campuses and communities. And finally, you know, this can be a catalyst for change. So you can think about it as a tool to foster institutional alignment for community-based teaching, learning, and scholarship, ways to think about the integration of engaged scholarship into the tenure and promotion process. And again, all of these aligning with other areas of self-study and tools for self-study that your institution may be interested or engaged in. And again, back to sort of that definition that we shared earlier, thinking about the difference between what community engagement is and community-based. And so this application and the definition is really around community engagement. And so there may be a myriad of things that are community-based that your institution is doing, but that is not the same as community engagement. And so being able to really distinguish between those two in the application is going to be very important for achieving the classification. And so this kind of chart just describes some of the differences. You know, it's again based on reciprocity and partnership. And so thinking about the ways that decision making is shared between community and institutions. Working with community to co-define the problems and co-create goals and outcomes, and thinking about an asset-based community engagement strategy that you're focused on the skills, talents, abilities, knowledges in the community and how those are valued and legitimized within the institutions, as opposed to just doing things in the community. So being able to make those distinctions and tell those stories are going to be a very important part of a successful application. Okay. And then finally, areas of focused attention. So again, the 2020 application is different from this one, but some of the things that we've seen consistently upon review of the applications and where we want to highlight for folks to pay attention to are the following. So again, thinking about reciprocal partnerships, right? There is a survey to the community that goes out as part of the application. We send those out at the end, and we have those surveys available in both English and Spanish to send to community partners to provide feedback on the partnership. So that is just FYI. Focusing on faculty and staff rewards and development. This application and this classification is really about institutionalization. So that means that community engagement has to be within the core purpose of the university's business, which is an academic. So thinking about the way that it supports faculty and staff rewards and development, thinking about the ways that community engagement is connected to the core academic work is going to be really important for a successful application. What is the infrastructure? How does it look like on your campus? What kinds of support, both financially and in terms of staff, is your institution making for community engagement? What kind of assessment tools are you using to know that what you're doing is working, to know that it's having an impact, both in terms of students as well as community partners? Again, thinking about curricular engagement, how is this connected to the core work of the institution? And also highlighting the impacts on minoritized students and faculty. We know from the data that the folks who are doing this work most on campuses are folks from minoritized backgrounds, both faculty and students. How are you pulling out the demographic data to talk about the community engagement that's taking place with these specific populations on your campus? Is going to be another area of focused attention that you'll have to share. And then effective approaches. So we've got a lot of resources for you all on our website. We'll share the website a little bit later. But there are guides, printable guides on our website that delve into each of the questions and give more context for you. So please take a look at those and use them as you're bringing together your teams and thinking about the kinds of data that you're going to be using. The other piece is really thinking about that cross-institutional team that's going to be represented in putting together the community engagement elective classification application. So think about having community partners serve on that team, maybe students, but think about folks from across the institution. They'll be able to both help you bring together the data as well as collect and share those stories and narratives around the community engagement work that's taking place. We also want you to describe not only the successes, but also maybe the things that didn't go as planned or were challenges, right? We are realistic that it's not easy to do this work. And so, if things didn't go well, why not? And what did you learn from them? So thinking about this, again, this is a self-assessment. So you have the opportunity to highlight those things that maybe you had a particular vision for it, but something got in the way. COVID. Right? You can talk about what you learned from that and how that maybe changed your practice. And then in this particular application, we asked you to give us examples. So we want you to provide the most important, compelling evidence that you have, but also thinking about it both in terms of depth and breadth. So it may be from across the institution, but it's also the depth of those partnerships and that community engagement activity that we want you to think about highlighting. You probably want to start out by collecting all the stories, right? So get a lot and see what's happening, and from there narrow it down to which stories tell the most comprehensive narrative about your institution's community engagement efforts, and include those in the application.
So now I'll dive a bit into some connections to the Voter-Friendly Campus project to help you kind of see where, if you're already working on this application and guide, where these items might transfer over to the community engagement elective application. So first, thinking about this pathways to community engagement, we think about this in two ways. The pathways to community engagement are also a pathway to thinking about your team, but the different areas of community engagement across the campus: a mission pathway, a partnership pathway, a pedagogical pathway, an epistemological pathway. Your application needs to have kind of items from all four of these fields in order to really be successful and have it to really showcase this is something that is institutionalized across all areas of the campus and not just in one or two fields. So we think about this and how it then also reflects to the voter engagement process, because it thinks about this in a very similar way. It asks you, for example, start looking about leadership, landscape, and commitment. And those are the three areas of this campus guide and kind of the areas of the application that you all are working on that are most reflective of the community engagement elective classification. So I'll start with leadership. What I did here is I pulled out kind of two questions from the guide that kind of support your application process and how those to connect to questions in the community engagement classification. So things like, who was working on the voter-friendly campus project? Who was working to ensure that there's diversity within the campus voting coalition? How does institutional leadership demonstrate their commitment to improving civic learning? And how is that explicit? Where is the visible commitment across the institution? We asked the exact same thing in the community engagement classification. What is the structure and staffing kind of campus coordination supporting community engagement? And that includes improving civic learning and democratic engagement. Who is doing that work? What does it look like? And where is it housed? And where is the commitment to kind of diversity of perspectives within that structure and framework? We also ask how is it the leadership supports community engagement and how do they promote it publicly and transparently and to make community engagement a priority. So if you're already working on this section of the application, you very likely have good solid descriptions of how this practice works on your campus that would fit and align within the community engagement classification. The same goes to the guide sections on commitment and landscape. These are kind of blended because some of the questions overlap in those sections. And I, instead of identifying certain questions here, because they are pretty vast, I identified the aligning sections in the community engagement classification where you might find this similar questioning. So for example, how do you currently assess and understand that civic learning and democratic engagement is pervasive across institutional culture? That aligns very closely with the sections on institutional culture and institutional assessment. The same thing goes with talking about the campus mission, vision, and strategic planning, and political learning, and thinking about learning outcomes and how they're measured and met. And then we also have sections on curriculum, curricular and co-curricular engagement. Those are also explicitly identified within the voter-friendly campus guide and application process. So again, if you're working through the application for voter-friendly campus and you have really strong core plans within this kind of commitment landscape section, you likely have equally interesting kind of descriptors, talk about your processes of engagement within the community engagement classification. One thing we mentioned previously is that we look a lot for alignment and triangulation. So how does the kind of this self-study for community engagement align with your strategic planning process or your campus compact, civic action plan, but also the voter-friendly campus project, right? If you're working on this application, that's a way to reflect on and describe that, how you did that process on your campus, created a core plan for civic engagement, and how that aligns with your engagement with the community. And those two things could be overlapped quite nicely within the community engagement classification application. And lastly, we have kind of a catch-all section at the end called community engagement and other institutional initiatives, where we ask a series of different types of other outreach and engagement projects that might not align within one department or unit on your campus, but might be spread across different areas that are less maybe intuitive about community engagement. And we ask that you check all that apply and then offer 2 to 4 core examples. Of this list, 2 of them relate to measuring student voter engagement and voting and registration, and also developing skills to engage in dialogue about controversial social issues and ethical issues across the curriculum. That definitely aligns with this particular project. And so again, if you're working on this voter-friendly engagement process, then you likely have 2 really strong core examples for this section of the application. So concluding advice before we dive into some Q&A here is that we encourage you in the application to not leave blanks. For those of you who are reclassifying, you might recall that the application used to be driven by kind of yes, no statements. Yes, do you do this? If so, describe it, and no, and move on. We eliminated that for multiple reasons, but to kind of simplify and streamline. If you aren't working on the process and you don't have a response for the question at hand, respond with, here's what we're currently doing and here's what we're working on. That to be said, skipping ahead a little bit of this list is that the application is looking at what's happening now, in the past and the now, but it's not future thinking. We don't look at what is going to be happening 5 years from now or 2 years from now, what's already happened on the campus. It's okay to hint to what may be to come, but that's not the core of what we're looking for in the application. And that goes with part of this alignment. It needs to be clear that there's a kind of coherent narrative, that you're aligned with other self-studies like strategic planning and mission statements and value orientation, and that it needs to be clear that the different aspects of community engagement on your campus all are from the similar approach and framework and are happening across the campus institutionally and not just in one section of the campus. That being said, it's really important to include the campus as a whole and not the campus in part. And that includes your community partners. We really encourage you, like we mentioned, to have community partners on your classification application writing team, because they bring a perspective as to what this kind of co-creation looks like and might have a different perspective of how you share that story through the application. And lastly, this is not a competition. We want to hear the stories of the great work that's happening in your campus, unique approach to community engagement, and how that might be, not always what you envision it to be, but your authentic self and authentic approach to what's been happening on your campuses.
On our website, you will see some exemplar applications that you can take a look at and reference with the caveat that these were from previous cycles. So some of the questions will be different, but it gives you some examples to work from. Finally, we've got the book that came out around the 2015 application, but our website is on here. There's tons of resources. There's other workshops and trainings that we've done, the recordings, and you can always reach out to us if you have any additional questions or ways that we can provide support as we move along.
We'll say that our website is getting a little bit of a facelift. So if you go there today, where something might be located, might change tomorrow, but we hopefully are making it more clear where to find things on our website, but you can always reach out to us if you can't find something in like our support. We're always happy to help. So with that, we think we're at our Q&A to give plenty of time to ask questions and kind of go over ideas for next steps. And we'll go ahead and stop sharing so you can see our pretty faces and we can see you as well.
Great. We don't have any questions in the chat just yet, but if folks want to unmute themselves, you are welcome to do so also that way and ask questions. And thank you both so much for all of this amazing information.
And we're happy to share slides after the fact too.
Fantastic. I'm really good at waiting really long periods for awkward silences in case people do have questions. So perhaps I can start with one. Is there a particular section or part of the application process that you think folks struggle with, and like what would be a tip for getting past that?
I think one area that comes up is on assessment and looking at assessment and outcomes, and that it may be very clear that one of two pathways, that one part of the campus or certain schools or fields of the campus are doing really robust assessments, but not all of the campus. So you're only getting the picture of what's really happening and processing from a sliver, but not the whole part. Or it may be very clear that there's assessments happening across the board, but not really sure what people are learning from the data and what happens next. It's being collected, but maybe not necessarily processed. So I think assessment becomes a tool that is hard to do. I know on the poll, we had a lot of folks saying that are at kind of large four-year public institutions that might be kind of spread, right? The network of community engagement looks like to be very spread. So figuring out ways to think through how to bring that data together to be understood and reflected on and then acted on would be as a challenge, but also an opportunity for to really improve what engagement looks like on your campuses.
Yeah, and what I would say in general is like, this is not a public relations application, right? This is really about self-study and development. And so utilizing it as a tool for that. So while we know there will be wonderful success stories, like the ability to share the times that it didn't go right, but what the learning that took place is going to be really important. I think, again, the cohesive narrative, we have read many an application where they're contradicting themselves in the application, right? There's not a clear definition. And so I think the clarity in the definition and what it means on a particular campus and how folks know that this is what it means, right, is going to be really important. So not using community engagement and community-based interchangeably, like understanding what counts for what is going to be really important for telling that cohesive narrative. And I think that write it with the reviewer in mind. A reviewer that has no idea who your campus is, where they're located, what they do, right? And if you're a big institution or a small institution, write it as if the person on the other side has no idea anything about your campus. I think you can tell a more holistic story and also include the bits and pieces that people will need to understand the context, because reviewers are Section 2 talks about the context of your institution, the communities that you're partnering with. And so really being able to provide that context is going to be an important space for the reviewers who are going to read the rest of it with that context in mind.
And Keith had a comment in the chat that I think you both can see, but he loves the emphasis on global developments and all of the ties with democratic engagement.
Yeah, and our hope is that in the forthcoming applications, we'll have more of an emphasis on the democratic engagement part as an important piece of community engagement, how we understand the work and importance of the public purpose work on our campuses.
Other questions that folks have? Are there institution types that are underrepresented that you're really seeking in this cycle, or do you have pretty good, like if there's someone, you know, too shy to ask and maybe thinks that this isn't for them, but they're at that kind of institution, is there a particular one that you're hoping to get more of this round?
Yeah, absolutely. So from our own analysis, the institutions that we have the lowest participation rates or the lowest successful application rates from are HBCUs, community colleges, and HSIs. Overall, we have a 60% success rate with applications, but we are interested in doing targeted outreach to those 3 types of institutions to both increase their participation and successful earning of the classification. And then on our end, in the ways that we're thinking about the preparation of reviewers, and the recruitment of reviewers to help support those kinds of institutions as well. You know, we have another set of slides that we thought we would hold off on to see if we had enough time, and it looks like we might. So maybe we can share those because they talk about some of the developments that we're looking to make. So really share those and then see if there's anything else and we can learn more about the campuses that are here. Right. So we talked a little bit about this in the question that you asked us, Jill, in terms of sort of our goals. And again, the targeted outreach to these types of institutions, community colleges, HBCUs, and HSIs. Lauren mentioned the change in the review process. So we really are interested in making this application of the field. And part of the way that we do that is changing the review. So we're going to be instituting a peer review process where we're going to be doing recruitment from across the field and outreach and training reviewers. And so our hope is to have 3 people per review team reviewing 4 to 5 applications. And then if they don't come to consensus, then it'll go to a senior review committee. But we really want to extend this as a process for field learning and field development. We want to increase the research and reporting on the classification data. So if you look at our website, there's information on there for researchers. We're sitting on a ton of amazing data. And so we really want to be able to have that accessible for folks who are interested in this, in the classifications and the type of impact and institutional transformation work that it can do. We'll be building learning communities. So we're going to be using ACE Engage as a platform to build our learning communities and partner with other organizations in the field to help support learning communities. You know, oftentimes this application, you did it and you sort of sat on the badge and there wasn't much work happening in between. And so we want to make sure that we are also facilitating the in-between work to help support the field growing and developing, especially in the areas that support the changing demographic of students on our campus so that our field can catch up to that. We've worked on pulling together a group of consultants. So one consultant that we have trained in the application as a service to the institutions in the field who want to access consultants. We've trained about 23 folks, and we'll be having their information on our website shortly to help support campuses that are interested in having consultants. And finally, we want to capture the history of the CE classification. Again, it's been around for 17 years. We missed our quinceañera, unfortunately, but we can get our 20 years. And we're in the process of working towards the development of new elective classifications. And so really being able to capture this rich history of the field is going to be really important. And so we'll be working with educational researchers as well as our National Advisory Committee to capture the history. And then
so part of learning communities, like Marisol mentioned, is that ACE has a platform called ACE Engage, which is kind of like a learning management system, discussion platform, catch-all hybrid. And so over the summer, we're going to start developing out learning communities that help campuses who are in the process of applying, but also those who are in between or interested in kind of furthering the field and their own best practice in learning between. Develop kind of learning network groups, and to help support campuses regardless of their size, funding, resourcing, geography, right? There's a way for them to learn from each other and to share best practices. So there'll be a mix of discussion forums, maybe some additional panels and events, informal working learning groups, and also space for some targeted outreach and support. As we mentioned, that we know from our own kind of reflecting on application data that we struggle with working with community colleges, HBCUs, and HSIs. So we plan to build learning groups, learning communities that help support some of those targeted outreach and types of communities.
Yeah, and what's interesting that we found from looking at our own data, we have 155 campuses that would be up for third time classification. And so these are institutions that have demonstrated that commitment because they've come back time and time again to do this application. And so what can we do to help support them? And we think these learning communities are an important pathway to doing that.
Right, and how those campuses can also support others who are working through the process from their kind of lessons learned.
Mm-hmm.
As you mentioned, we, as part of the Carnegie elective classification team, do not do one-on-one kind of individual support of campuses. We work with groups like you all to kind of train and outreach and help work through the application process. So to kind of support campuses that would like additional support one-on-one, we have trained a group of individuals who would like to serve as consultants. And so their information will be on our website. It's more that they know the ins and outs of the application a bit more in depth than what might get out of a webinar or other kind of workshop, but they'll be available at the end of the month, early June. So if campuses are interested in that kind of consulting and engagement, you can contact them directly to work out that kind of support.
Yeah, and all the folks who we train have had previous experience with the classification, so they're deeply knowledgeable.
I think we already went over the peer review process, but kind of a breakdown of what that might look like. We're opening the call for reviewers, including individuals who have not previously been at a campus that's been classified, but folks who are deeply involved in community engagement in different facets of their campuses. So that call will come out this late fall, early winter, with training happening throughout next spring. If that sounds appealing to you, we encourage you to kind of watch our website. And so you can apply to be a reviewer to learn more about the process overall as part of that training. I'm also very excited that we have just kind of worked with Australia and Canada to develop their own elective classifications for community engagement. We'll be inviting colleagues from those two countries to join the peer review process, to also do some cross kind of international co-learning, what this process looks like. So that'll be a really exciting development as we move forward. That's our website. Much more easy to read, perhaps, on a big screen. And so if you have any further questions, more resources, and that's a great way to start to have kind of find some next steps, look at past webinars, sample applications, scholarly articles, lots of things for some support. So now maybe we can take additional questions if you have any.
So I had one quick question about timeline. So I know about the 2024 timeline. The 2026 timeline, is that just for those that are reapplying, or can first-time groups apply during that time as well?
First time can apply then as well. We know that a lot of campuses may be waiting to apply for that next cycle because in the current COVID world, they're still kind of developing and realigning their systems. And so, yes, that's going to be the exact same timeline, whether you're a first time or reclassifying.
Yeah, and we also,
then-
go ahead.
Sorry, and is that the kind of the expected cycle from now on, every 2 years that first time can apply? Okay,
Correct. Yeah, it'll be an exact same iteration cycle every 2 years.
excellent.
And if you're interested, the leadership classification just opened, and it'll be open through December of 2023. And then they'll kind of get on a similar 2-year cycle thereafter. It's on its first iteration, so that opening application phase is a bit longer than usual because it's new, but then they'll be in sync with the community engaged classification every 2 years.
Excellent.
Any questions? Well, I have a question for you all. How do you feel like your participation in the voter-friendly campus aligns or connects with the Carnegie community engagement application? Like, would it be the sort of bulk of the application? Are you fitting into already existing teams? How are you making this connection on your campus?
Especially folks who are reclassifying might have some good responses here.
Allison, where are you at? And
Hi folks, Allison. I'm from Binghamton University. We'll be first time applicants, but not until 2026. So we are in that category of kind of taking an extra year. We've been working towards things for a while, but with COVID, it made it harder to kind of keep momentum going, but we've still been, really actively engaged in looking at the 2024 framework. I mean, I think for us, in terms of like the integration with our voting work, we have a really robust voting program at Binghamton. And so I think definitely a lot of the questions in the section that's kind of on like student pathways and the co-curricular engagement pieces, there's a lot of integration with both our voting work, but also our broader kind of civic programs that we run for students that are more focused on like civic engagement and development and democratic participation. I think sometimes we tend to think of, even though the work is housed under one center, we tend to think sometimes of our community engagement and civic engagement work of happening kind of separately. And I think we need to do a better job, and we've been working towards doing a better job of really integrating them. I think in particular with our faculty outreach and engagement has been focused a lot on community engagement. And then we have faculty who are doing more civic things. And I think there's more ways that we can kind of integrate those more intentionally. I think especially around like moving students from like service to civic action and helping them see like a wider range of pathways. So I think this has gotten me kind of thinking more about ways that we can integrate that work more intentionally.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. And that's a really great point. I think if you have an example where your campus is doing scaffolded work with students in terms of engagement, like definitely thinking about the ways that you bring those pieces together and talk about that in the narrative, because that's going to be really important when you're thinking about student development, right? So it may be the introduction to the community is happening through kind of a service or one-day service program, but then how do you create these scaffolded experiences that connect to reflection, that connect to more civic engagement work, and then ultimately to deeper work that these students are doing in partnership with communities. Thanks, Allison. Let's see, Joy. What's it looking like on your campus?
I'm here.
Hi.
Hi. I'll show my face.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've had some camera issues today. I am at East Tennessee State University, and we are a past recipient, but have not been in the process for a number of years. And it's a unique time for us because we're have some wins that are happening. We actually have a new vice provost for community engagement who starts next week, June 1st, which is a long time coming for our institution. And that's really coming also at the same time that our QEP for our SACS accreditation, reaccreditation is on community engaged learning. And so we had actually built into our university strategic plan, our 125 plan was to receive the community engagement classification, but I don't know that, between COVID and all those things, that just didn't make a lot of movement. So I was just curious to listen, and because I think all of those things we need to be strategically thinking about how they align and working smarter, not harder, as we prepare for maybe a 26 submission or even later. So, and of course, we've had some really good successes in our voter engagement work and are excited to see how that can play into this. And then the other piece that I think is interesting and I want to dig a little deeper into is just connection with diversity, equity, and inclusion work as well.
Yeah.
Because I think there's some opportunities for us to strengthen all of these areas at the same time. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joy. I appreciate you sharing all that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
We're seeing a lot of, so I would say that the trend over the last maybe 5 to 10 years in the field has been this coming together of DEI and community engagement. There's been a lot more centers that are bringing that work together very intentionally. And so and you'll see that also in the questions that we're asking as well, right? We really see this as an opportunity to also push the field in ways that we're beginning to see the trends, so that those questions are being asked so institutions can reflect on them and think about whether the changes they may need to make on campus to move in that direction. And so, if you're seeing that alignment already happening, or that opportunity, really seize it, because what we're learning from student participation data falls in line with this. What we're learning from best practices in partnership and reciprocity really falls in line with it. So being able to tell that cohesive narrative about the overlap and the connection is going to be really important. And we're all about working smarter, right? And so being able then also to connect it to accreditation processes or other things that the institution's doing, and how you can utilize that data to help support sort of the other pathways on this vision is going to be really important. So you guys sound like you're on your way. And just let us know how we can be supportive of you as you're moving in that direction. Lindsay, you have your hand up.
Hello, and I apologize if this was answered at the beginning. I joined a few minutes late, so if this was talked about at the beginning, my apologies. I joined towards the end and I got that website with the link. So I was definitely here for the community classification, but I saw in that link, I'm just looking that there's the leadership one. And I think I heard you say that it was new. So I just wanted a little more about, like, is this the first year? Or what does that look like? And then I mean, if it's new, like, you can still apply for both. And then is there an overlap? Like, is it okay if some of our same information is in the community one as in the leadership one?
That's a great question. So yes, it is new. The first cycle of it just opened in mid-March and will close in December of 2023. Back for a couple of your questions. So yes, you can apply for both at the same time. If you have the capacity to work on similar processes, because it's just as lengthy as the community engagement application. But yes and no, like yes, but some of your responses can be the same. So for example, the first section talks a lot about campus context. Those would be likely the same. And we know some campuses also have kind of community engagement and leadership and civic engagement offices kind of combined. That means that you might be doing assessment in very similar ways. So the what assessment look like might be similar. The outcomes, of course, would be different, but your measurement tools might be the same. There's ways to kind of combine answers because they're reviewed separately. There'll be different teams, different processes, very different. So that wouldn't be an overlap.
And we're hoping that in the fall, so look out for information on our website to do a webinar for those institutions who are interested in applying for both. So we're going to kind of cover those pieces where there's an overlap. One of the things that we didn't mention that is the same for both is actually, we used to have a section at the beginning where we asked for like some of the demographic data and other things from campuses. Now we have that automatically set up. So once an institution puts in their IPEDS number, then all of that information comes automatically. So you can skip that piece because it'll be generated automatically through IPEDS numbers.
Gotcha. And just a super quick follow-up question to that. So again, I'm on the website right now, just kind of looking at it. Again, first time I heard about Leadership One, very exciting. And I'm looking at it. So it says applications are available and give calls after the payment is complete. So there's just no way to view the application before you pay for it?
You can email.
Yeah, we can email. I think our goal is to get that application posted publicly really soon. We've been undergoing a couple of website updates, so I think it lapsed, but we're going to get that public. The community engagement one is publicly on there. We're working on getting leadership publicly on there as well.
Gotcha. And the public community one should be on that same. I'm going to go back because I'm on the
Correct.
It will be. And if you email us, we can email it to you.
Yeah, we can do that.
So the info at Carnegie Elective Classifications.org.
to get the leadership one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can send it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'll put the email address in the chat.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for asking.
Well, we are right at time, so I want to thank our presenters who shared their time with us this afternoon. They are going to attend the NASPA CLDE conference as well in June, so if you want to meet these fabulous people in person, we will be there. Or if you have other questions as you continue to explore that come up for you and you're going to be in attendance at that conference, this is just a quick reminder that your voter-friendly campus action plans are due on May 31st. Is there any other reminders that I'm missing from my Campus Vote Project colleagues who are on the call?
We will just be sending out a recap email after this event, which will include the recording and any other notes from our speakers. So all the important details should be there and it should be out in the next few weeks. Excuse my birds.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, and thank you all for sharing your stories too. Take care. Bye.